Have you ever walked into a meeting with what you absolutely know is a winning idea?
Oh, yeah, we all have.
Right. The logic is bulletproof. The data is beautifully laid out. The request is completely reasonable. And instead of the applause you expect, you just get, well, hesitation.
Or worse, just a flat out no.
Exactly. It is practically the definition of frustration.
Yeah.
You leave the room and you replay the tape thinking, maybe I should have used a different chart, or maybe my opening joke just fell completely flat.
You obsess over the performance.
Yeah. But the concepts we are deep diving into today suggest that we are actually looking at the completely wrong timeline.
It really is the worst feeling, though. Because we do obsess over what happened during the meeting. The guide we're looking at today argues that the game was likely won or lost in the before.
In the before. This is the whole concept of pre-suasion. Not persuasion, but pre-suasion.
Right.
And the mission of our deep dive today is to unpack this idea. It argues that the highest achievers, the people who seem to just get what they want effortlessly, they aren't actually better debaters.
No, they're better stage setters. They change the psychological environment before they ever even make a request.
Which creates a really sharp distinction between what the guide calls the average performer and the top performer.
It does. Think about the average performer. They are entirely obsessed with the seed.
The seed being the idea itself.
Exactly. The idea, the pitch, the product. They polish it, they analyze it, they check the genetics of the seed to make sure it's perfect. But the top performer, they are obsessed with the soil.
I really love that gardening analogy because, you can have the most genetically perfect seed in the world, but if you drop it onto concrete,
Nothing happens.
right, nothing is going to grow.
Pre-suasion is essentially the art of tilling the soil. It's about arranging for recipients to be receptive to a message before they even encounter it.
It sounds a little mystical when you put it like that.
It does, but as we'll see going through these insights, it is actually rooted in some very hard, very specific behavioral science.
Well, let's look at the data then, because I really don't want you listening at home to think this is just some Jedi mind trick. There's a study we have here called the Mall Survey Experiment that just perfectly illustrates this soil concept.
This is a classic. So imagine you are walking through a busy mall. You're dodging kiosks. Maybe you're just looking for a pretzel.
Always looking for a pretzel.
Right. And a researcher with a clipboard steps right in front of you and asks for a few minutes of your time to take a survey. What do?
I instantly pretend I'm on a very important phone call and I just keep walking every single time.
Which is exactly what most people did. In the control group for this experiment, only 29% of people stopped to take the survey.
And honestly, 29% is way higher than I would expect.
Same. But that is the baseline, less than a third.
Okay, so what did the top performers do differently?
They added a persuasive opener. They didn't change the survey itself. They didn't change the requester or the clipboard. They just asked one single question before making the request.
And that question was?
They asked, do you consider yourself a helpful person?
That's it. Just, are you helpful?
That is it. And naturally, most people said yes. And who wants to say out loud to a stranger that they aren't helpful?
Fair point.
But here is the key. Simply by saying that word yes, they psychologically affirmed that identity. They basically told themselves, I am a helpful person.
They put a label on themselves right in that moment.
Correct. And because the human brain has this desperate need for internal consistency, when the requester immediately followed up with, great, will you complete this survey? The compliance rate didn't just inch up.
It skyrocketed.
It jumped to 77.3%.
That is massive. That is nearly triple the success rate just from asking one question first.
All because the soil was prepared. What they call a privileged moment had been created.
That term, the privileged moment, let's unpack that a bit, because it implies there is a timer ticking.
There absolutely is. Presuasion isn't a permanent state. It creates a temporary window of receptivity.
So it fades.
It does. In that mall experiment, if they had asked, are you helpful? And then waited, say, 10 minutes to ask for the survey, the effect would likely have vanished completely. You have to strike while that specific identity is active in their mind.
Which links perfectly to a core principle we see in the guide. What is focal is causal. It sounds a bit academic, I know.
A little bit, yeah.
But the implication is huge for anyone trying to get a yes.
It really is the mechanism behind why all of this works. What is focal is causal essentially means that if I can get you to pay attention to something, you will automatically assume it is important simply because you are paying attention to it.
Our brains just equate attention with importance.
Exactly. It operates the three-step process. First, Directed attention. I point the spotlight somewhere.
Okay.
Second, assigned importance. Because the spotlight is there, you assume it matters. And third, agenda setting. By controlling where you look, I am basically controlling your reality for that specific moment.
There is a really profound quote in our notes on this. It says, "Nothing in life is as important as you think it is while you are thinking about it."
That is profound. It implies we can influence major decisions simply by shifting where someone's eyes or mind are resting right before the choice is presented.
This doesn't even have to be verbal, right? We just talked about the helpful question, which is very direct. But the materials get into associative priming, which is where things get really subliminal.
Yes, the concept of thinking is linking.
Right.
Our brains are giant association machines. We don't really evaluate things in a vacuum. We see them through the lens of background cues and metaphors.
There is an example here about an online furniture store that is, frankly, kind of terrifying in how effective it was. The clouds versus coins study.
I love this one. So an online store sends visitors to a landing page to look at sofas. Half the visitors see a webpage background filled with fluffy white clouds,
Just as a wallpaper.
just as the wallpaper. The other half see a background filled with pennies, coins.
Now, consciously, nobody is looking at the web design and thinking, fluffy clouds. I must buy the softest sofa available.
Consciously, no one is doing that, but subconsciously. The clouds primed the concept of softness and comfort. When those specific visitors looked at the sofas, they rated comfort as the absolute most important factor in their decision.
And the crazy part is they were willing to pay a higher price to get it.
They spent more money simply because of the background wallpaper.
That is wild.
But look at the other group, the ones who saw the coins. They were subconsciously primed for economy. They ended up rating price as the most important factor, and they searched primarily for the cheapest options available.
It really makes you wonder how much of our own free will is actually just us reacting to the subtle environment around us.
It is very humbling. It suggests that our priorities in any given moment aren't fixed. They are totally malleable, shaped by whatever metaphors are lingering in the background.
So we have the theory down. We know we need to prepare the soil, capture focus, and use associations. But let's actually get into the toolkit. The guide lays out 7 universal principles, or preloaded levers.
These are the heavy hitters. If you are trying to move someone to a yes, you really need to know which lever to pull and, crucially, when to pull it.
The information organizes them into stages, which makes it super practical. It is not just a random list. Stage 1 is cultivating the relationship. This is for when you are starting from absolute zero.
Right, because you can't just walk up to a total stranger and ask for a massive favor or a loan. You have to establish some kind of connection first. The 2 levers they identify here are reciprocity and liking.
Reciprocity is fairly well known. It's the whole idea that if I do something nice for you, you feel obliged to do something for me.
Yes, but the nuance here for Pre-suasion is that it cannot just be a basic transaction.
What do you mean?
Well, if I just hand you a generic corporate swag bag at a conference, that isn't really reciprocity, that's just marketing. For the lever to work, the gift has to be meaningful, unexpected, and customized.
So it has to show you actually paid attention.
Exactly. If I find out you are a huge collector of rare stamps, and I surprise you with a specific stamp I found, that creates a real psychological debt. You feel a deep need to balance the scales.
It makes total sense.
Yeah.
And then the second lever in stage 1 is liking, which seems obvious. We say yes to people we like. But how do you actually engineer that in a short window of time?
It's not about being the most charming person in the room. It's actually about similarity and compliments. We naturally trust people who are like us.
So finding common ground quickly.
Right. Pointing out genuine similarities like, oh, you grew up in Ohio, I grew up in Ohio. It instantly creates a bridge. And honest compliments totally disarm people. There's that great old saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Okay, so we've broken the ice. We cultivated the relationship. They like us. Now we move to stage 2, which is reducing uncertainty. Because even if I like you, I might still be really unsure about this risky new idea you're pitching.
Exactly. Uncertainty is the absolute enemy of agreement. When people are unsure, they freeze up. To unfreeze them, the guide points to 2 specific levers: social proof and authority.
Social proof being the whole safety in numbers concept.
Yes. If you are pitching a radical new software to a hesitant client, don't just tell them how great it works. Show them that their 3 biggest competitors are already using it successfully. It signals to their brain, this path is safe.
And then authority. This explains why doctors always have their diplomas framed right behind their desk.
It absolutely does. But the persuasion key is that you have to establish this authority before you deliver the message. Yes. If you just tell a friend they need to exercise more, you are just nagging them. But if a cardiologist tells them to exercise, it is a medical prescription. You have to signal your expertise early so that when you finally speak, the listener's critical thinking pauses and trust takes over.
So we built the relationship, we proved the idea is safe. Now we hit stage 3, motivating action. This is the close. How do we actually get them to sign on the dotted line?
This is where consistency and scarcity come into play. We actually saw consistency back in that mall experiment. People deeply want to align their future behavior with what they have already publicly stated.
So you get a small commitment first.
Precisely. You ask, do you agree that cost cutting is a major priority for this quarter? Once they say yes to that, your actual proposal for a new cost-cutting tool becomes significantly harder for them to reject.
Because they'd be contradicting themselves. The other lever here is scarcity, which is basically FOMO, right? Fear of missing out.
It is, but the focus specifically needs to be on loss. The behavioral research is crystal clear on this. Human beings are much more motivated by the fear of losing something than by the prospect of gaining something of the exact equal value.
So focus on the pain of not acting.
Exactly. Don't just tell a client how much money they will save by signing with you. Tell them exactly how much money they are losing every single day they delay saying yes.
Now, I've been keeping track, and that was 6 levers. But the guide sets a 7th one completely apart. It calls it the ultimate connection, the lever of unity.
Unity is fascinating because at first glance, it sounds a lot like liking. But it is much, much deeper. Liking is saying we are like each other. Unity is saying we are of each other.
Of each other. So we're talking about family dynamics here.
Family, tribe, religion, deep military camaraderie. When you achieve a sense of unity, influence isn't really a request anymore. It becomes collective action.
But how do you realistically create that in a normal business setting? I can't exactly walk into a boardroom and become someone's brother.
No, you can't. But you can do it through co-creation. Have you ever heard of the IKEA effect?
Where we love the ugly bookshelf, we built more than a store-bought one.
That's the one. We place higher value on things we help build. If you want a stubborn client to approve a complex strategy, don't just go away for a month and present it to them perfectly polished.
You bring them into the kitchen.
You build it with them, ask for their advice early in the drafting process. When they help build the solution, they become bonded to it. People are not going to vote against their own creation.
That is such a powerful distinction. It completely shifts the dynamic from me versus you trying to win an argument to just us solving a problem.
Precisely.
I want to pivot slightly here because the deep dive takes a really interesting turn into physical space. We've talked a lot about the mental environment, but what about the actual room we are sitting in? This section on the geography of influence really struck me.
It's the idea that your physical environment actively dictates your performance. And they cite a study that I think every manager and teacher should hear. It involved young women taking highly difficult math tests.
And this directly addresses the stereotype threat, right? That unfortunate but very pervasive societal stereotype that women aren't as naturally gifted at math as men.
Right. And the thing is, even if you don't personally believe the stereotype, just knowing that it exists in the culture creates anxiety.
You worry about proving them right.
Exactly. What if I fail and confirm the bias? That background anxiety uses up valuable cognitive bandwidth. And in the control group for this study, that invisible stress caused a measurable performance deficit.
Oh, so how did the researchers fix it? Did they give them a pep talk?
They didn't change the test, and there was no verbal pep talk at all. They simply moved the test taking into a different room.
Yeah.
A room where they had hung photos of highly successful female scientists and leaders on the walls.
Just photos in the background.
Just photos. And that incredibly simple environmental cue was enough to eliminate the performance deficit entirely.
That is amazing.
The environment subconsciously primed a mindset of capability and success, which completely drowned out the cultural stereotypes.
It really makes you look at your own office differently,
Yeah.
or your house. If you are sitting there trying to be highly creative, but you're staring at blank gray walls, you are actively fighting your own geography.
You really are. You can absolutely design your physical space to persuade your own brain.
Which leads us perfectly into the next major concept, persuading yourself. We spent all this time trying to figure out how to influence clients and bosses, but can we use these exact same tools on our own procrastination?
We can, and we should. The guide offers a framework for this called if-then planning. It sounds almost too simple, but the cognitive impact is huge. They illustrate it with what they call the resume experiment.
Walk us through that one.
Okay, so researchers took a group of people who desperately needed to write a resume. They told the control group, hey, you should really get this resume written by next week. But they gave them no specific plan.
I can definitely guess how that went.
0% success. Not a single person in the control group did it.
0. That is brutal.
It's wonderfully human, honestly.
Right.
But then they took the Pre-suasion group. They asked them to plan exactly when and exactly where they would write it. Something like, when it is Tuesday at 7 p.m., I will sit at my kitchen table and write my resume.
And the result for that group?
The success rate jumped to 80%.
From literally 0 to 80% just by setting a hyper-specific time and place.
It works because you are linking a specific environmental cue Tuesday at 7 p.m. directly to an action. When 7 p.m. hits, you aren't agonizing over deciding whether to work. The time decides for you.
The environment triggers the habit.
Exactly. The core insight here is that we don't just fire when ready, we fire when readied. You have to actively ready yourself with a specific plan.
Okay, now before we wrap up today, I have to play devil's advocate for a minute. We have talked about hacking people's attention, subliminally priming their behavior, leveraging social pressure. This stuff is incredibly powerful. But it also sounds, I don't know, dangerous. Is there a line between persuasion and straight-up manipulation?
Yeah, that is the absolute elephant in the room. And to its credit, the guide does not shy away from this. It includes a very serious warning about the ethics of influence. It actually calls the cost of unethical influence the triple tumor.
That is some vivid imagery. What are the 3 tumors?
The first one is poor reputation. Let's say you use these tricks to deceive someone. You pull the authority lever, but you're actually a fake expert. Or you use scarcity, claiming an item is almost sold out when your warehouse is totally full.
People eventually figure it out.
They always do, and when they do, you lose public trust. And as we know, trust is nearly impossible to regain once it's gone.
Which obviously hits the bottom line.
It does. But the second tumor is internal, and I find this one really interesting. Employee burnout.
How does persuasion cause burnout?
Well, the research shows that if management forces their employees to use shady, manipulative tactics, essentially asking them to lie for the company, it creates intense moral dissonance. It physically and mentally stresses the employees out, and eventually they just quit.
So you end up losing your best talent simply because you're asking them to compromise their own integrity every day.
Exactly. You rot from the inside. And the third tumor is loss of business. If you trick people into buying things they don't actually need by hammering these psychological triggers, you might see a great sales spike this quarter. But you are killing your long-term viability. You are evaluating the completely wrong metrics.
So the core value system here is that persuasion should strictly be used to highlight the truth, never to manufacture it.
That is the golden rule. If your product is truly scarce, you should definitely tell people that is helpful, accurate information. If you are truly a leading expert, show them your diploma. That is relevant. But never fake the scarcity and never fake the expertise.
Okay, so we've persuaded them, and we've done it all highly ethically. The final piece of the puzzle discussed here is post-suasion. Because you mentioned earlier that this privileged moment, this window of receptivity, is temporary. So how do we actually make the yes stick long after they leave the room?
That is the ultimate challenge. Pre-suasion unlocks and opens the door. Post-suasion locks it open. And the mechanism for that is commitment. But for a commitment to actually last, the materials outline 3 mandatory qualities. It must be active, it must be voluntary, and it must be public.
Let's break those down quickly. Active meaning they have to physically do something.
Yes, a polite nod in a meeting is not enough. Having them write the decision down is infinitely better than just having them say it aloud. Having them sign a formal document is better than a handshake. The physical action cements the internal belief.
Okay, and voluntary meaning there's no gun to their head.
Right, they must genuinely feel that they chose this path. If they feel coerced or bullied into the yes, the commitment completely dissolves the second you walk out of the room. The motivation has to be internal.
And finally, public.
They must show others what they've committed to. Remember that deep drive for consistency we talked about. Once we state a position publicly, that drive kicks into overdrive. We will actively fight to defend a choice simply because other people know we made it.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive into the underlying psychology of why we do what we do. If we look all the way back at the beginning of our conversation, We started with that gardening metaphor.
We did. And I really think we should end there, too. There is a brilliant quote from Sun Tzu in the notes that perfectly summarizes this entire philosophy. Every battle is won before it is fought.
That is definitely the big takeaway for me. We spend so much of our time and energy fighting the actual battle, the argument, the pitch deck, the debate. But the real victory is almost entirely in the preparation.
It is. Stop focusing so much on the seed, your core message. Start tending to the soil the moment before the message. Because if you can change the attention, you truly change the person.
So here is my final question for you listening right now. Think back through the decisions you have made today. The specific brand of coffee you bought, the email you agreed to answer, the new project you took on. How many of those decisions were actually based on cold, hard facts? And how many were made simply because of what you saw or heard or felt right before the choice was even presented to you?
It really does make you rethink everything.
It certainly does. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
A pleasure.
Catch you all in the next one.